Howdy, folks. Come on over and find a place around the campfire. Get yourself some of that coffee there in the coffee pot. I just made it a few minutes ago, just in case you showed up, and I'm glad you did. It's shaping up to be a good storytelling night. I've heard a few tonight, and I'd like to tell you one of mine. My story is about some deer hunters. Now, deer season generally opens in the fall and goes into the winter. And true hunters see it as a chance to fill their freezer and feed their family and friends. There isn't much like a good venison steak. I'm partial to it. But it isn't so easy to get a deer. Every year things get tougher. Oh, there's more competition and less land available to hunt on. So the hunters that can make the time, they go out in the late summer, early fall, and they scout their hunting areas for deer. They look for likely camping spots and water sources. That's always important, of course. And they look for just the right buck. They hope they won't go far before the season opens. And it's a good time to be in the outdoors. There aren't generally as many people as will be found in the fall. And with less pressure, it's a good time to just use your binoculars and your spotting scope and just watch the animals. They're just going about their business without all the pressure of the hunters in the woods. In the fall, the animals feel the pressure of the oncoming winter and the stress of the rut, besides the hunters that are camping and hunting in the woods. Well, so back to these hunters. Well, Mike and Rick, they were out doing just that. They were scouting the woods. Now, they've been doing this every year for as long as either one could remember. See, they were brothers, and they'd been brought up to love the outdoors and the bounty of the fall. And they were camped out with several other friends that enjoyed this time in the woods as much as they did. And in fact, it became a tradition to scout these woods for many of them every year. Now, they all realized the best way to scout was in small groups. That way they could cover more ground. That and two people moving around it's a lot quieter than three or four. And the method they would use is they get in their vehicle, a Jeep or quad or side by side, and they leave camp, get away from all the people. Fairly early in the morning, they travel out to some likely spot, and they begin glassing the hills with their binoculars, and they walk from there. They'll park their vehicle, and then they'll walk from there for a ways, and they'll glass some more, and they're always listening and watching and reading signs on the ground. That's kind of what you do. It's a little bit like hunting, but you're not actually hunting. You're not carrying a rifle, and you don't have a tag. Gives you permission to take an animal. Animals aren't quite ready yet. Now, once they were sure that they'd covered an area and they couldn't do much more and they got too far away, they'd return to the machine and they'd move the machine to another spot and they'd do it all over again. They just kind of travel around the woods that way. Usually return to camp around lunchtime, and then they'd rest through the heat of the day. The animals aren't moving as much until the late afternoon. And then they'd go out and they'd scout till dark. They'd return for dinner. And then usually a fun evening with drinks and telling stories around the campfire. Kind of like what we do here. So it is that Saturday that the brothers started out in their Jeep to scout a remote area. It was quite a ways away from camp. They wanted to get out there a ways. They drove slowly along the shaded dirt road, looking for deer or any signs of their presence, such as tracks in the dusty road. Well, not finding much evidence had them farther away from camp till they were in a part of the mountain they rarely got to. They just didn't need to usually travel that far, but it was kind of a rough year, so it had them out there stretching their abilities. It seemed like this tract hadn't been logged, and there hadn't been a fire for decades to clear the brush, so it was really thick and dark timber with few access roads, because those are cut in usually by the loggers. Surely there were deer in the timber. There had to be, but they'd be hard to find and dang near impossible to hunt. And any meat would be packed out on your back. Maybe a couple of trips, right? Depends on how big the animal was and how far down the hill it is. Well, the chance of bigger deer and less competition from hunters led them to park the Jeep on a wide spot in the road and head into the big trees and thick brush. Well, the brothers split up at the Jeep, and they agreed to meet back at the Jeep at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and they'd head back for lunch. Well, Mike headed down the drainage to look over a creek and a meadow that they could kind of see where it was down there, while Rick decided to head up the mountainside to get some overview from this rocky knob that they could see on top of the ridge up there. Well, Rick had walked about a half mile. He was moving slow, like he's supposed to do, and looking for tracks and watching for deer. He stopped and he sat on a log to catch his breath and get a drink of water. And while resting, he thought he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. Well, moving his head real slowly, he turned to face the direction of where he thought he saw the deer. He stared intently for 4 or 5 minutes, and he didn't see any more movement. Then a flash of brown about 100 yards out, just quickly between 2 trees. Now he's really paying attention. Not the long body of a deer, but a quick flash. Then off to the left, away from that movement that he'd seen, was a crash. It instantly got his attention, and he jumped up, figuring whatever it was had spooked and ran back the direction it had come from. Now he's looking and listening. He's straining. Everything he's got's paying attention to that. He's straining to see movement or hear crashing footsteps or some kind of evidence that something was going on out there, and it was quiet for another 2-3 minutes. Then off to the right, the other direction from where he'd seen the movement, came a crashing sound. So he decided he's moving in that direction a few steps as quietly as he could, and then he froze, trying to figure out what was going on. Then, near where he'd seen the brown flash earlier, he saw a brown, upright creature move from tree to another tree, then another tree, then stop. Now, it's behind the tree, so he doesn't see it except for when it kind of goes between the trees. Now he's intrigued and on full alert. So he moved toward it about 20 foot or so. He doesn't know what this is. He stopped again to listen. Then after about 2-3 minutes of just intense curiosity, a slight movement happened about 4.5-5 foot up the trunk of this tree. It just happened to be the one he was staring at, so he saw it. And it was the most amazing thing happened. Not what anyone expects to see in the forest. A face appeared from behind the trunk. Dark in complexion, with 2 bright, shiny eyes. They were dark-colored eyes, and a kind of a smirk for an expression, if you can imagine that. Rick thought he was looking into the face of a child. The eyes had the curiosity of a young one, but the face, though it was similar, it was not human. Now, it's ringed by wispy facial hair and the thin lips and large ears set it apart from us. They stared at each other for what seemed like forever. Just like that, the face disappeared almost as rapidly it appeared on the other side of the tree, with what looked like an upturned smile. Well, Rick was about to laugh when from some distance behind the creature came the most ungodly bellowing. The creature turned toward the sound, and at the same time Rick turned to flee. It's in our DNA, folks. Just you get into one of those situations that requires, immediate action for self-preservation. And if you don't freeze, you'll move amazingly fast in the right direction. It's my opinion that the freezers, they get weeded out of the gene pool. It's fight or flight, folks. Well, Rick had moved at least 100 yards in the time it took me to tell you that he was moving away from whatever was making that god-awful sound. And he wasn't stopping to look back, and he could tell where it was, and he was moving away from it. It took him much less time to reach the Jeep than it had taken him to get to where he had stopped to rest. and the bellowing and the snapping of limbs and crashing sounds behind him kept him moving as fast as he could. Well, when he got within sight of the Jeep, he could see Mike was there leaning on the Jeep with a beer in his hand. He'd found no real sign at the meadow and had returned to the Jeep to wait for Rick. "Well, what's that racket?" asked Mike. "Get in the Jeep, let's go, I'll tell you later." It didn't take long, and they were moving along that dirt road fast enough to feel all the rocks and make quite a dust cloud. But when they got a mile or so away, Rick slowed down a bit and told Mike what had happened back there. Mike just sat there for a while, then thinking, and then turned to his brother and asked him if he thought the others would believe his story tonight at the campfire. I mean, come on, you expect them to believe that story. Is it so hard to believe that a young Bigfoot played peek-a-boo with Rick in the woods, or that its mother got mad at it, probably for disobeying and wandering off? Well, why not? All kinds of tall tales are told around the campfire. While all of our stories have an element of truth in them, most times they're metaphors for lessons to be learned and knowledge to be passed on. Throw in a mug of something good to drink, good friends and family, all around a nice campfire, and you've got the perfect evening. Don't just like tonight. Thanks for sharing it with us. Of course, you're always welcome here, so I hope to see you again pretty soon. Until then, keep believing, folks. This is Clay Steele. Good night.